In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, media M&A heats up. Disney sweetens its offer to buy Fox assets, outbidding Comcast in the process and nearing U.S. antitrust approval. Can the end results compete with the streaming giants? Plus, how does Credit Karma ensure the data from its 75 million users is safe? We're going to hear from CEO Ken Lin. And inside Google, will the tech giant make changes to improve diversity and close the alleged pay gap? We're going to hear from one employee who is speaking up and pushing for reforms. But first to our top story and a Bloomberg scoop. Disney is close to winning U.S. antitrust approval for its $71 billion deal for 21st Century Fox's entertainment assets. The bid is creating a potentially insurmountable hurdle for a rival bid from Comcast. Bloomberg was told the Justice Department is set to approve the deal in as soon as 2 weeks. Disney has also agreed to sell some assets to address competition problems stemming from the tie-up. Disney and Fox agreed in the merger agreement to sell assets, including Fox's regional sports networks. Joining us now from New York, Nabila Ahmed, who is covering the story for Bloomberg News. In LA, we have Bloomberg media reporter Anusha Sakui, and on the phone we have Needham senior analyst Laura Martin. So, Nabila, I will start with you. What exactly do we know about how the deal is laid out and how this really is a fatal flaw for Comcast?
Look, Disney's come out with a very aggressive bid today, as you said, about $71 billion for the whole thing, and they've upped their own bid by about $10, and they're $3 a share higher than what Comcast had proposed. And they submitted the offer just before the Fox board had a meeting today in London and put this to them, and the Fox board obviously has recommended it. Now, the DOJ news is really interesting today, and David McLaughlin, our colleague in DC, broke that news, and he has found out that the DOJ is about to approve this Disney Fox offer in as little as 2 weeks, because Disney is very keen to get this done, as you know. And they're about 6 months into this process. They've talked about divesting some assets as needed to get the deal done, and that's the regional sports networks, and you know, it might be a couple of other things as well.
Now, Laura, we know that Bob Iger and James Murdoch have been talking behind the scenes. You know, why do you imagine Murdoch is more attracted to Disney?
I think because Disney's content culture is more in keeping with the Fox content assets, and I think, you know, anybody would like to be stuck on a plane next to Bob Iger. He's the greatest, manager on earth. So I think they'd much prefer to be owned by the Walt Disney Company than Comcast.
Is this the end for Comcast, do you think, or do they have another move?
I don't. I think you're going to just see them be more aggressive on price, and because a lot of ARBs are involved here, because this is the Fox has been in play for 6 months, I think you're going to see the ARBs take the higher price. So if Comcast can top this bid by 10 or 15%, I think you'll see the vote go for the Comcast bid, regardless of what. Fox only is voting at 17%, so it can be overruled here.
Interesting, Anusha. So a showdown could be coming. You know, what do you expect to see in terms of how this plays out?
Well, it's, you know, potentially Comcast coming back with a higher offer, and, you know, analysts are already sort of speculating of an offer with a 4 handle in terms of a share price offer. So we'll see. I mean, clearly what's at play here is something that is, you know, a fairly unique and attractive group of assets in a race to really build up scale in Hollywood and differentiate yourself from, you know, a whole slew of other smaller distributors and content creators. So it's really important for both of these companies to win this group of assets from Fox. So I don't think, well, the expectation is that Comcast isn't going to be giving up anytime soon, but, you know, they are both pushing the envelope in terms of, you know, debt levels that this incurs.
Nabila, can this combined entity, if it happens, can they compete with the likes of Netflix?
Emily, that's the big question, right? We've had an analyst come out this week and say, why are these legacy media businesses buying more legacy assets to think that that's what's going to help them compete with Netflix? But as Rupert Murdoch himself said, the reason he's getting out of it is because he thought they couldn't build a scale that was needed. And that's the buzzword right now, as you know, is that they're all trying to build scale and hoping that by being bigger in size would actually help, and that alone should be able to help them against the Netflixes of the world, who, by the way, have massive budgets, right? Netflix is spending about $8 billion on content this year, so scale really matters here.
Laura, do you imagine that we know Bob Iger has been extending his contract, but do you imagine that this is potentially setting up James Murdoch to play a bigger leadership role potentially at Disney in the future?
I do not think that. I don't think the Disney board would allow James Murdoch, with the scandals in the UK, to take a meaningful role at the Walt Disney Company.
Then how do you think this really sets Disney up, if this goes through, Disney up to take on the streaming competition?
So what it does is give a direct-to-consumer more content, both in current production and in deep library. I would sort of push back at the prior comments, because spending $8 billion a year, starting like last year or the year before. But these libraries Disney's about to buy from Fox are 30 years old, and they were spending $4 billion a year for 30 years. So when you have these deep libraries, you really do have a more over-the-top service, and I think Disney could do it at $7 a month now, the way CBS All Access has it. But if it adds the Fox assets, it could maybe price it at $12 or $15, because the library will be so much deeper.
Anusha, what's the reaction in Hollywood? What are people saying right now?
That's a very good question. I think, everybody sort of like in a wait, has been for a while as well, in a sort of wait and see mode. I think people have come to the conclusion that there is going to be major change in Hollywood. Just whatever happens with this deal, we're going to go from a landscape that was 6 major Hollywood studios to potentially 3, maybe 4 in the coming years. And, that's something that not a lot of people expected. So there is overcapacity to some degree, and you can see that in, some of the weakness that you see in the weekly box office, and, even Disney has flops. So, it's tough out there. And so, so you need the armory that you can, and that's why something like Fox is so important. And, there'll be a lot of job losses. So whoever buys it potentially. So there's a lot of consolidation that needs to happen sort of within the two businesses. So there will be job losses, and there's nervousness about that.
All right, Anusha Sakuya and Nabila Ahmed for Bloomberg, as well as Needham senior analyst Laura Martin. Thank you all. Of course, we're going to continue to follow. Tesla is suing a former employee accused of stealing company secrets. Tesla accused Martin Tripp, a former technician at the Nevada Gigafactory, of launching a sabotage campaign after being denied a promotion. Tripp allegedly wrote a computer program to steal proprietary information and then sent it to 3 unidentified entities. Tesla is asking a judge to stop Tripp and anyone working with him from disclosing or using any of the car maker's secrets. The company is also seeking unspecified, compensatory, and punitive damages. Coming up, the border wall, nearly 2,000 miles long in Silicon Valley, has been trying to cash in on it. How the politics of the wall borders big tech immigration desires. Next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. The battle over the U.S. border with Mexico, it is not just a political fight over the 1,954 miles where people seek to enter the United States. It is a conflict raging in Silicon Valley, one that seeks to balance their expressed desire for comprehensive immigration reform versus big money government contracts. Take Microsoft, for example. The company scrubbed an online reference to its work for ICE, the U.S. Customs and Enforcement Agency. The post, written back in January, touted Microsoft's cloud contract with ICE and the Air Force. But recently, it went missing, right as the battle over separating families at the U.S.-Mexico border was all over the news cycle. Now, after Bloomberg asked Microsoft on Monday about the omission, it's back online. And this comes as Silicon Valley's relationship with government agencies like the Pentagon and ICE are coming under increasing scrutiny. Here to tell us more about all of this, Bloomberg's Karen Wise. She has written extensively on the tech sector's long and complicated history with the U.S. border for Bloomberg Businessweek. So, Karen, first of all, tell us exactly what happened with Microsoft here. Of course, they are now out front talking about how they are against separation of families at the border, but their work with ICE has gotten a lot of pushback.
Exactly. Microsoft had this blog post back in January where they touted this contract that they had with ICE and how it had this great potential future to use AI tools like facial recognition. And it was just out there since January. And then all of a sudden it disappeared. And after kind of a lot of media scrutiny, they pretty quickly put it back online. And they've had a lot of pushback from their own employees now as well, saying we don't want any contracts to do with ICE. Microsoft says that their work with ICE has been essentially kind of office type of functions, legacy email systems, spreadsheets, kind of the boring stuff of a big bureaucracy or company, but now they have some internal employees saying, no, we don't want any contracts with them at all. So it puts them in a tough position because they have been now come out pretty strongly saying that this particular policy is unacceptable.
This coming from a letter from Microsoft employees obtained by the New York Times. We request that Microsoft cancel its contracts with ICE and with other clients who directly enable ICE as the people who build the technologies that Microsoft profits from. We refuse to be complicit. We are part of a growing movement comprised of many across the country who recognize the grave responsibility that those creating powerful technology have to ensure what they build is used for good and not for harm. No sign of any of these companies planning to cancel their government contracts despite their protests of these policies, right, Karen?
No, we haven't heard of anyone coming out and saying, no, we're going to cancel a contract, or even say that I've seen at least anyone say, no, we'll let this one lapse and won't look to renew it.
So what do you make of the response of tech companies here? I mean, so many tech heavyweights from Mark Zuckerberg to Elon Musk to the CEO of Uber coming out and saying that they are against this, but certainly walking again that fine line between politics and business.
Yeah, I mean, some tech companies, it's easier, frankly, for them to take a political position on this because they don't have as much business directly with the government. Like the co-founders of Airbnb were one of the first tech executives to come out against this policy, and they're not as ingrained in tech operations as some of the more business-to-business type of companies. But they kind of led this movement of other folks then now having to come in or have pressure to come in. But you haven't seen everyone. You haven't seen, for example, Palantir say anything, and they are one of the largest contract holders with ICE. You haven't seen anything official out of Amazon, at least that I've seen. So it is a fine line when they are both do business with the federal government, and they also are looking for comprehensive immigration reform and the type of policies that they need to get more high-skilled workers in their company.
You've written an incredibly detailed and compelling piece about the history of technology at the border, hundreds of millions of dollars spent on technology there, projects started and stopped. How is the U.S. using tech at the border right now? What's working, what's not?
Yeah, there's many different parts of the borders. There's kind of the official ports of entry, and there's all kinds of different surveillance technology being used there, kind of X-ray cameras, databases, biometric databases, things like that. And then there's the huge expanse of the border between U.S. and Mexico, where that's just terrain. A lot of it doesn't have fencing along it, and that's where the government's tried for decades to use surveillance technologies to kind of bring the image of the border and border crossings into local patrol stations so they can then go out and respond. But the thing that just struck me and my colleague Lauren Etter, who did a lot of reporting on this together, was that decades of really struggling to make technology work. The border is immense. It is extremely harsh environment. There's huge winds. There's extreme heat. Insects eat through sensors. So this is really different than deploying a system in the middle of a city. This is way out there, and it makes the technology a lot harder. Although there are attempts to change that. Technology and sensors have become a lot less expensive. So I think we will see some change over time around this.
Meantime, Palmer Luckey, the founder of Oculus, has a new tech startup proposing to use VR technology, VR headsets, to stop border crossers. Stephen Levy wrote a big piece about this in Wired. As it pertains to the families, Stephen said that Anduril, as this company is called, isn't much thinking about how this affects immigrant families, but did express optimism about this kind of technology as a solution. Are you as optimistic?
You know, I think we've seen that it's very hard to deploy at a large scale. It doesn't mean things don't work in particular areas. And I think something that they are doing, which has had some moderate success in other areas too, is they're trying to use more off-the-shelf components and put them together in kind of a new context here. What happened in the past was the government was trying to do these huge bespoke tech projects, and they just exploded, basically. They just didn't work, these huge efforts. So in one sense, that is definitely has potential, but I think the reality of the harshness of the environment out there, it just has to be tempered with what we're used to living in cities and dealing with technology on our smartphones. I mean, it's way out there, and you have just crazy weather patterns, and you have people crossing. Largely, most of the crossings are just families looking for a better life, and so that makes it harder to do the type of enforcement that you see in other countries. People often look to Israel as an example of a high-tech border, which is true. They have an extremely high-tech Internet of Things type of border, but they also police it with a military force, and they're not ashamed about that. And that's both less practical along the U.S.-Mexico border, given its size, and also they're just facing somewhat of a different threat.
All right, Bloomberg's Karen Wise. Great piece from Karen. Check it out in Bloomberg Business Week. Thank you so much for joining. Coming up, we hear from Credit Karma CEO Ken Lin about rising competition and protecting consumer data. This is Bloomberg. David Solomon, President and Chief Operating Officer at Goldman Sachs, discussed the bank possibly expanding its operations in the cryptocurrency market. He spoke with Bloomberg's Stephen Engel from Beijing in this exclusive interview.
We're cautious about exploring, those activities. Yes, we are clearing some futures around Bitcoin, talking about doing some other activities there, but exploring very cautiously.
One of the biggest themes to emerge in fintech this year, meantime, is the use of data and how companies collect and store information and how they prevent more breaches. With more than 80 million users, it's a top priority for Credit Karma, says Credit Karma. I want to get to Bloomberg's Selena Wang in New York, joined by Credit Karma CEO Ken Lin. Selena?
Thanks, Emily. Ken, so after the Equifax breach happened, signups at Credit Karma actually spiked, which means that consumers were going to trust yet another financial institution with their sensitive data to protect themselves. So what's your reaction to that?
Well, I think that it's important to note that, this is something that more and more will happen. And, it's important to make sure that you have the right access and the right protection. And I think for us, it was signing, there's a first party relationship that really matters. I think the outrage at times was, a company that you didn't have a relationship got breached and your information was lost and stolen. I think for Credit Karma, we very much focus on having that access and education, making sure that consumers understand what that is.
And I'm sure you've been following the Facebook Cambridge Analytica saga. There's a lot more scrutiny about the way tech companies collect, aggregate, and use that data. You collect a lot of sensitive information on your users. So how are you applying that data and keeping it safe?
Well, our first priority at Credit Karma is always security. We've said that from day one. I think the key here is we give people access to information they historically don't see, right? So, when it comes to your credit report, it comes to your financial information, we're actually providing all the information that consumers, or more specifically banks, are using to make determinations around eligibility. So we actually provide that access, number one. And number two, I think with that, consumers actually have more power. They're able to see when there are errors. And I think the other part of that is really the first party aspect of it again. Is consumers are giving us consent to look at that information, to have it within our warehouses, and we don't sell or share that information as part of our user privacy policies, and I think those are important aspects of the business as well.
Now, free credit scores was something that you were trailblazer in applying and giving to consumers, but now it's no longer novel. You have credit card companies, banks, and competitors giving that information for free. Yet despite that, 1 in 3 adult Americans use Credit Karma. Why is that, and how do you keep on growing market share?
Well, I think you have to remember that when consumers are actually looking for credit scores, they're actually looking for what the options the credit scores provide them, right? And I think that has been our note. So we're not a credit score company. We're a technology platform that's really focused on understanding what the needs of the consumers are, so specifically around their finances. So at Credit Karma, we see about $4 trillion worth of consumer debt, for example, and we're able to help those users optimize. Do they have the right rate? When is the right time to apply for a different product? And I think that's what consumers are looking for, and that's what Credit Karma is building.
So Bloomberg reported earlier this year that you missed the 2017 revenue targets. Sort of walk me through that, and what's the goal for this year?
Because we're a private company, we don't share a lot of that information. But my note is that that was our stretch goal. That was that Bloomberg covered, which is fine. But from a board perspective, I think we were 1% off. We are seeing good, strong double-digit growth in our business, and I think it's a testament to the value that we're creating for our members.
So what's the ultimate vision? You've expanded far beyond free credit scores. You give advice on all sorts of things like loans and even automobiles. So what's next?
Well, we're here to talk about the future of finance, and when you really think about it, there's been great innovations in technology, whether that's e-commerce, whether that is mapping. But when it comes to consumer problems around what loans to apply for, what's the best interest rate, how do you simplify the confusion in this space, I would argue that there's actually not that much innovation in that space, and that's what we're very much focused on. So when a consumer registers for Credit Karma, we spend a lot of time understanding how are they using their finances and how can they optimize the things that they are doing, and how can we predict and help them get to that next stage, whether that be saving for retirement or buying their first home.
And Silver Lake recently invested $500 million in the company at a reported $4 billion valuation. You've also been around for more than a decade. So how are you thinking about an IPO?
I always think that the IPO is actually a tool in our toolbox in terms of achieving our mission, which is really to help consumers and really change the space that we're in. So we think about that first and foremost. So the time to use an IPO is when you need to raise capital. That shouldn't be the end goal, and we've always thought about it this way. And our perspective now is that there's a lot of meaningful investment that we can do in the private markets, and we want to make sure that we invest in the right way, thinking about that mission in the future.
Neither you nor your co-founder from Silicon Valley, and you've talked before about how that's helped you really understand the average needs of Americans. Do you think there are enough companies being created in Silicon Valley that address the needs of average Americans?
I think that's a great question. I think that there needs to be more. I think that to get to scale, particularly in finance, is the way you change the industry, because the companies that play in this space are so large and they have such market power in terms of what innovations are. So I'm a big proponent of the Valley, but more importantly, big proponent of supporting the ecosystem, because at the end of the day, these companies that are getting to scale are the ones that are going to help change the ecosystem. Is going to help make finance more efficient, and that will put real money into the hands of everyday Americans. I think that's a problem that is oftentimes ignored.
Well, thanks, Ken. Fascinating conversation. Emily, back to you.
All right. Ken Lin, CEO of Credit Karma in New York. Thanks so much, Selena. Coming up, we will speak with one Google employee who is speaking out about the lack of diversity, pay inequity, and more. That's next. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology. And be sure to follow our Global Breaking News Network at TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Earlier this month, Alphabet's annual meeting was turned on its head when a Google employee took to the stage to criticize her boss's pay. That employee requested Alphabet consider tying pay raises to progress on diversity and inclusion. The proposal was voted down. But sentiment has been growing internally that executives aren't doing enough to address workplace harassment, diversity, pay equity, and more. Liz Fong-Jones is a longtime employee at Google who has backed a petition to create better policies and procedures. She joins us now in New York, and here with me in San Francisco, we have Bloomberg Tech's Mark Bergen. So, Liz, I want to start with the big picture. Google just released its diversity report. Not much progress. Black and Latina employees still make up 2% and 3% of the workforce. Women, 31%. But they do get some points for more transparency. They've given us more information about attrition. What's your reaction to the fact that not much has improved in 12 months?
I'm frankly disappointed by the fact that not much has improved. I think that there's a lot more that Alphabet's executives could do in order to improve diversity and inclusion.
So, what do you think the problems are? Daniel Brown, Vice President and Chief Diversity Inclusion Officer at Google, said, when this report was released, we care deeply about improving workforce representation and creating an inclusive culture for everyone. While we're moving in the right direction, we are determined to accelerate progress. I mean, Google executives are often saying all the right things.
It's true that they're saying the right things. However, the problem is that they're not doing the hard changes that need to happen within the company that would materially affect making changes to the way that they conduct their business.
So you helped create a petition with coworker.org pushing for better workplace policies, an end to things like harassment. You've worked at Google for a really long time, and we don't often hear from employees while they're currently at a company. Why are you speaking up about this?
We tried to fix the problems internally, but we reached a point where we realized that we couldn't solve this problem entirely on our own. That first of all, this is a systematic problem that affects not just Google, but all tech companies. And secondly, that we needed more leverage, that we needed to apply public pressure in order to get this problem of harassment and discrimination solved. So, go ahead.
Mark, what do you make of the fact that Google employees are increasingly speaking out when we've never heard from them before?
Yeah, I mean, like Liz said, it is something that's happening across the industry. Just yesterday, we saw Microsoft employees, over 100 employees sign a petition to Satya Nadella, the CEO, about their work with ICE, with Immigration, Customs and Enforcement. So this is starting to spread a little bit. I think Google has certainly for a long time, and Liz can speak to this, had a lot of avenues where employees can air their grievances in weekly staff meetings. They have this culture of having this open debate and discussion. Yet there have been sort of issues where management has sort of refused to move. And now in this past year, there's been some really significant changes. The Project Maven, the military contract that Google had with the Pentagon, that was it's no longer being renewed in large part because of an employee protest movement.
Liz, you've actually been active, on some of these Project Maven issues. Tell us what exactly you're doing and what you're hearing from your colleagues about this arrangement that Google has with the U.S. government.
I'm constrained in what I can talk about with regard to information that my company would consider proprietary or sensitive. The primary issues that I'm talking about with the media relate to working conditions, things that materially affect employees' ability to be safe in their workplaces. It is true that employees do have a robust culture of communicating and expressing dissent within the company, and I think that that's led to some positive results for Googlers, for Google, and for the world at large. However, I can't really speak specifically about specific projects that Google may or may not have engaged in because I'm concerned about retaliation from my company.
So what can you tell us about then your own experience at Google and the experiences of your colleagues that you have witnessed? It's not just about hiring, it's about retention and progression. How have you felt about your own journey at Google, and do you feel like management has been supportive of advancing your career?
I think that I've been very lucky that I have a supportive management chain. I know that other people have been significantly less lucky, that they've had experiences where they've had hostile managers that refuse to advance their promotion and career prospects. I know of people who have been assigned the wrong level upon hire and had it take 2 or 3 years to be assigned the level that their peers with similar experiences have been assigned. And therefore, it's kind of a situation where a lot of people, myself included, had many microaggressions, right? Like situations where people talk over you in meetings, where people steal your ideas, right? But I think that it goes even beyond that at Google, where there are systematic problems with how the company assesses performance, how the company assigns levels to people. And I think that that really holds back minorities as far as how equitably they're treated with the company and what their career prospects are.
Google does have a fairly robust peer review system, Mark, which employees have told me can be easy to game if you have a lot of friends, but if you don't, it can be more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've heard that from a lot of employees, and Google's also in the management is in a difficult situation because at the same time they're facing lawsuits on the total opposite end from James Damore, the fired engineer, claiming that the company has sort of been discriminating against white males. And that's certainly, I think, that the idea is that Google here feels that they're at least between a rock and a hard place on these issues. I think to Liz's point, the company has been sort of a trailblazer around Silicon Valley, right? Everything from the way that they give out free food is something that all these companies have aspired. A lot of young startups and even larger companies look to Google to sort of set the path on HR, on company culture, on hiring. And it seems like this sort of issue, the employees are pushing management to say, come out front and be a leader on this as well.
I want to talk a little bit about the Department of Labor investigation into Google Pay. There's this really wide-ranging pending investigation into how Google pays its employees, alleging that it is unequal. Google has given us a statement saying that Googlers' experiences of things like compensation, performance ratings, and promotion should be based on what they do, not who they are. We conducted our first pay equity analyses in 2012 and completed the most recent ones in 2017. We looked for unexplained pay differences by gender and race and ethnicity and made upward pay adjustments where necessary before Googlers' 2018 compensation went into effect. Based on these analyses and adjustments, we have zero statistically significant pay differences. Liz, what's your take on that?
I think that they have controlled for all of the factors that are responsible for a bunch of the discrimination, right? Like they say, we adjusted for level, we adjusted for performance rating. When these are the exact things that people are complaining about, saying that they're being treated unequally. So, of course, when you control for those things, the pay would be regarded as equal. I have a friend that I referred to Google, and she had 4 years of experience. And the recruiter talked to me and said, hey, we're putting her through the system. Everything looks good. I went and looked at what it was in the system when they assigned me to be her lunch interviewer, and they said, please interview this person for level 3, the entry-level position. And I went to the recruiter and I said, you know what, this doesn't seem right. This doesn't seem okay. Like, I know of plenty of other people with that level of experience who have been brought in one level higher. And the recruiter told me, I need a reason to increase her level to level 4, such as a higher expected compensation. And we know that people's past compensation, people's compensation history, and their expectations tend to be affected by their gender. And as a result, I can imagine that if this is a systematic policy of Alphabet, that you would result in having a whole large number of people who are underrepresented minorities being assigned the wrong level because of the fact that they didn't give their recruiter a high enough pay target, or that they didn't give their recruiter a pay target because they didn't want to name the first number. And I think that that's kind of the situation where you can say, you know what, you can totally have pay inequalities and yet say, oh, adjusted by level and performance rating, everything's fine. So I think that the numbers look good on paper, but I think the reality on the ground is quite different.
Now, we know that the founders of Google, Larry and Sergey, have a lot of voting power. Were you disappointed that shareholders voted down this proposal to tie pay to diversity progress?
I'm certainly not surprised. I think that given the supermajority voting power controlled by the insiders at the company, that getting the proposal passed by the vote count was going to be a long shot. However, I think that what we did demonstrate is that a significant number of the shareholders who hold the stock, who are outsiders, do support us, the employees, in pursuing equal pay, in pursuing greater representation, and in pursuing having a safe workplace that's free of harassment.
Liz, you've been active on Twitter offering to help Microsoft employees. Are Google employees organizing at all with respect to these ICE protests? Can you tell us anything about what's happening at the grassroots level?
I've seen a lot of employees who are concerned about the ICE detentions, and a large amount of fundraising for the children that are affected. And I also know that Google employees are broadly concerned about the ethics of what we as Google employees work on, of what we as tech workers work on in the entire industry. And therefore, I, among many others, am working together with Microsoft employees to help them as best as we can with ensuring that they, too, have a voice in what their employer does.
All right, Liz Fong-Jones, staff site reliability engineer at Google. Bloomberg Tech's Mark Bergen, thank you both. so much for joining us. Coming up, blockchain enthusiasts have been boasting all the various solutions and applications for the technology. Now Ernst & Young, or EY, and Microsoft are pairing up to use blockchain within the gaming industry. Details on that next. And a quick programming note, be sure to tune in for a new episode of The David Rubenstein Show, peer-to-peer conversations with Robert Smith, Vista Equity Partners founder and chair. That airs Wednesday, 9 p.m. in New York. This is Bloomberg. While the price of Bitcoin has taken a tumble in 2018, there's still a lot of interest in blockchain. Global spending on blockchain solutions is expected to reach $2.1 billion in 2018, more than double the $945 million spent in 2017, according to IDC. Let's get to Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde in London with more. Caroline?
Emily, thank you very much indeed. Let's talk about the application of blockchain in industries. Let's talk to Paul Brody, Global Innovation Blockchain Leader at EY. He's over in Seattle. And talk to us. The company just announcing a partnership with Microsoft, launching a blockchain solution, this time for content rights and royalties management for media and entertainment industry. It's all about gaming, Paul.
It is to start with, and in fact, the problem we're trying to solve here is the incredible complexity of business contracts between Microsoft, especially to start with, Xbox gaming platform, and all the video game publishers that are out there. There are several thousand different publishers and games. Every single one of them has unique contracts and rules for all the different countries. That is a hugely complex intellectual property problem that lends itself extremely well to being deployed on a blockchain.
And so how can this be expanded? Is it as easy to apply to other areas of royalties and where else other than royalty and content can the blockchain easily be purposeful?
Oh, absolutely. So, in fact, rights and royalties for video games are very similar to movies and entertainment, music, books, patents. Working with Microsoft, we plan to basically put out this solution across, first of all ranges of intellectual property, and also to open it up beyond video games and Microsoft and their partners to other companies in the media and entertainment and content business.
And why did EY get involved in this? What was the value add there for Microsoft? Because I'm sure they got plenty of blockchain expertise within the company.
They do, and Microsoft has been an incredible technical partner. But what's been amazing is we actually have, not only do we have deep kind of process knowledge around this, but we actually have been equal partners with Microsoft in the technology development. So EY developers have been putting together the process around smart contracts, scaling up this blockchain. This will be the biggest, from a transactional perspective, this will be fully deployed, the biggest blockchain, industrial blockchain in the world. When it's fully deployed out, it'll be 2 million transactions a day. So our engineers worked alongside Microsoft engineers in the Azure environment to make sure that we could build a solution that would actually scale even larger than both Ethereum and Bitcoin combined.
Yeah, talk to us about the scaling challenge, because this has been what's been holding back many who've been frustrated with Ether on the Ethereum blockchain and Bitcoin, and why it can't be used for a payment solution. Why have you been able to scale to get so many transactions when it's an industrial solution?
So there are definitely some advantages in working with the Microsoft environment in Azure. We chose a platform called Quorum, which allows us to scale. And we've made some choices in the design architecture that will allow us to speed up the process. But the most important thing is really, if you look at platforms like Ethereum and Bitcoin and others, they have plans for scaling. But what is more challenging is figuring out the business process application and the business value creation. And that was really the big driver. For Microsoft, we're able to take out something like 2/3 of their cost of managing a rights and royalty system. And we're able to drop the time required to process transactions and tell partners how much they have coming. We've dropped that by more than 99%. This is probably the biggest cycle time compression we've ever had in my career.
Where else are you looking then? What other industries do you think that this can be best placed? I've heard of energy, of course, being a key one. Is this somewhere that EY is already looking at? And what about other technical partnerships other than with Microsoft?
So we've got a foundational principle at EY that we believe that blockchains will do for ecosystems of companies what ERP did for the single enterprise. And anywhere you have complex business logic and shared network controls that need to be implemented, it's a good solution. And we think the early ones that we're working on are things like supply chain management, so logistics partners, manufacturing, any kind of intellectual property. Ultimately, our goal is to have an integrated system where we could take a software license token from a Microsoft solution and drop it into a manufactured bill of materials for a car that would be managed in a car sharing environment. So there's lots of different solutions here that can go end to end in this blockchain environment.
I've got to get your take there, Paul, on what I'm hearing. You hear it from every big bank CEO, basically, is, I don't really think or know if there's much longevity in crypto, but there certainly is in the technology that underlies it, in blockchain technology. What do you think about the crypto that these blockchain technologies are built upon? Do you think that they have this long-term staying power, as many of those who are investing in it believe?
So what I would do is I would separate the two things. So there's cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ether and others, and I think those, as proof of concepts, they're amazing. They definitely have longevity, but the platforms, I think, are likely to be even more powerful. In the long run, if you think about something like Ethereum or Quorum, a token can be a payment token, but I can have dollar tokens or euro tokens or yen tokens. So there's no requirement, if you're doing business on the blockchain, that you have to do your payments in Bitcoin or Ethereum. Those will certainly be out there, but we believe the long-term future of blockchain technology is intercompany collaboration, but with payments and exchanges of products and services that are based on classical fiat currency tokens like dollars, euros, yens, all of those other types of tokens that we're used to using.
The rise of the private blockchain. Paul Brody, EY Global Innovation Blockchain Leader. It's been great having your expertise. Thank you. Emily.
Thanks.
Caroline Hyde in London. Thanks so much, Caroline. Coming up, from being denied a visa to the U.S. to being voted one of the top CEOs. Our conversation with Zoom's Eric Yuan next. This is Bloomberg. Social media giant Instagram has announced it's reached 1 billion active users for the first time ever. In comparison, Facebook has around 2.2 billion monthly active users. Snapchat has about 100 million monthly active users. The social platform will also start a new chapter of mobile video with company IGTV, so users can watch long-form vertical video. The video could be up to an hour long. Well, as we mentioned earlier in the show, Silicon Valley has a long and complicated history with immigration reform. My next guest is someone intimately familiar with the highs and lows of the U.S. immigration system. He grew up in China, and when he applied for a visa to the United States, he was rejected 8 times before finally getting through on the 9th. From there, he went on to become a corporate vice president at Cisco, one of the founding engineers at WebEx, and then went on to found Zoom, a cloud company providing audio and video conferencing and online office solutions. He's raised $145 million in funding, including from Sequoia Capital. And on Thursday, he was named the #1 CEO in the United States, according to the online recruiting site Glassdoor, a recognition based on the anonymous and voluntary reviews from employees over the last year. Eric Yuan, CEO and founder of Zoom, joins us now. Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations. I mean, what went through your head when you heard about this honor?
This award is not about me. It's about our employees' achievement, because it truly reflects the culture we as a team has built.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. I mean, you were born and raised in China. As I mentioned, you applied for a visa to the U.S. 8 times.
Yeah,
and you still applied again.
I planned for 20 or 30 times. So actually, at that time, the good news actually, before I got declined for 10th time, I got the visa. So I was born in China. I came here in 1997 as a new immigrant, and joined WebEx as one of the first several founding engineers, and worked on WebEx for many, many years. And then I left Cisco to start Zoom.
Now, when you were at Cisco, you weren't really happy with the product that they were creating, and Cisco is the giant in this industry.
Yep.
So, didn't you go to your bosses and say, this isn't working?
I did, actually. You know what? And I was working very hard to make WebEx better. Guess what? 13 years later, I did not see a single happy WebEx customer. I feel like I have an obligation to fix that problem. But Cisco is a great company, but it was unwilling to change its collaboration strategy back then. I had no choice but to leave to fix the problem. Essentially, I guess, I created that problem. So.
Lots of controversial discussions happening right now on immigration reform, the separation of families at the border. What has been your reaction to all of this as someone who has been through this process?
I think ultimately, when it comes to making a tough decision, you really look at it in the long run. Make sure all the decisions we made sustainable. separate the kids with family, I think absolutely wrong. You cannot punish those kids. You look at the kids that are crying, I think I have 3 kids. I feel very sad, very, very sad. Yeah.
So, Silicon Valley has a long-running diversity problem, as we've been discussing. You are in a unique position to make a difference. What are you doing at your company to make Silicon Valley a more inclusive place?
So Silicon Valley is an innovation center for the world, right? I think one of the key reasons why Silicon Valley is so successful because of embrace of diversity. If you have people coming from all over the world, gather together, discuss something, I think that's where the innovation is coming from.
And yet women are underrepresented, minorities are underrepresented.
Yes,
mostly.
Absolutely right. Yeah, that's why we need to focus on that problem. Like, from a Zoom perspective, we always look at female engineers, female executives. Look at our executive team. 30% are female executives.
So Mark Zuckerberg, Lloyd Blankfein, Mark Benioff, those are the CEOs who have been on this list several years in a row. What are you going to do to stay on it next year?
First of all, I admire them. I really like Mark Benioff, Mark Zuckerberg. I think, from our perspective, especially for me as an immigrant, I got to work harder and harder. Make sure keep our employees happy, keep our customer happy. I think it should be fine.
Eric Yuan, CEO of Zoom, thank you so much for joining us. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang from San Francisco. We'll be back tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.